Hey everyone, and welcome back to Rowing with the Homies. I'm your host, Finlos, and I am so glad that you're here with me today. And on this show, we talk about the deep connection between the disciplined effort we put into movement, the rhythm, the pace, the inner work, and the major challenges we face in our mental and emotional lives. And today, the challenge that I want to talk about is reciprocity. We're going to look at what I call relationships of convenience. And these are the connections, whether they're romantic, platonic, sexual, or even familial, where one or both parties treat the bond like a temporary resource. They are fresh, energetic, and fully engaged when the relationship is new, when it requires low effort, or most critically, when they have something specific to gain from it. They show up for the exhilarating launch, but they allow the relationship to atrophy over time because they simply stop putting in the necessary reciprocal care. They get bored. They get distracted or chase something new. And the central idea we're exploring today is this: healthy, long-lasting relationships depend entirely on the reciprocation of care and energy input. And when that pattern of convenience becomes common, it leaves people feeling used, cynical, and ultimately isolated. In the world of physical effort, we know that if we don't use a muscle, it doesn't just stay the same size, it shrinks, it atrophies. That quiet, steady process of decay is exactly what happens to a relationship when consistent, reciprocal effort is removed. We're going to look at the psychological and systemic roots behind the pattern, how it's perpetuated by culture, and the cost we all pay when we confuse convenience for connection. The initial spark for this was in just observing the pervasive and painful new relationship energy crash pattern from people that I encounter, that I see, that I know throughout my life, whether that be in work, friendships, acquaintances, friends of friends, even in movies or in books. It's a fairly common pattern. And this new relationship energy crash, the NRE crash, is when the relationship, whether it be dating, a new close friendship, or even a collaborative group, is fueled entirely by the ease and the excitement of novelty. The chemistry is free, the effort is minimal, but the moment the connection transitions to requiring deliberate, sustained input, the person seeking convenience checks out. The relationship is left to decay because it is no longer an immediate source of personal energy or gain. And this behavioral pattern is not accidental. It is, like most behaviors, learned and rooted in the psychology of the self, but fueled by the bedrock of many, many systems. At its core, the problem is an extractive mindset. We're living in the long shadow, the long scar of colonial and capitalistic logic, which over time has taught us that value is created through taking. And this logic views the planet, labor, resources, and crucially, people as abundant, disposable entities meant to be consumed for short-term profit. And when we apply this logic to our personal lives, we start viewing our partners, our friends, our coworkers, and our family as temporary resources, a fix for loneliness, a source for career advancement, or a garbage bin for emotions. Once the utility is extracted or the relationship requires sacrifice, the resource is discarded for the next shinier one. And I think it's important to think about that word sacrifice, because I'm not talking about martyrdom. I'm more talking about decentering, the understanding that gain for all requires collective energy. And that means that there are times when we must tend to the needs of others before or in place of our own needs for the betterment of all. And as we consider this extractive lens, it is intensified by patriarchy and the gender dynamics at play. Historically, patriarchal structures have relegated care work, vulnerable, consistent, high-effort work of emotional maintenance, primarily to women and other marginalized genders, often without financial or social recognition. This creates a cultural precedent where care is not seen as a reciprocal duty, but as an external expected resource to be perpetually supplied by others. And for many people, especially men, in air quote Western culture, the pressure of hegemonic masculinity teaches that engaging in reciprocal emotional labor is a weakness, while externalizing that labor and prioritizing individual gain is a strength. And this refusal to engage in vulnerable, inconvenient care is a foundational pillar of the convenience relationship. The other side of the coin is the fear of boredom. In our hyper-stimulated culture, the quiet, consistent work that builds trust, the steady rhythm of showing up, can feel stagnant when compared to the high of constant novelty, of always having access to new, shiny things. The person of convenience confuses consistency for stagnation, and so they constantly chase the high of new relationship energy, unable to tolerate the necessity of quiet that is required for true intimacy. And this is not just new relationship energy in terms of people. It shows up in activities, on projects, on work, on tasks. The new energy, new relationship energy is always strongest in the beginning when something is fresh and when everybody's energized and when everybody is showing up. But during the long haul, when focused consistency is required, that's when those who are allowing themselves to fall into this extractive mindset disengage. This pattern is pervasive because the systems we live in reward it. And when the people on the receiving end feel this repeated extraction, they tend to become cynical or guarded and afraid to show kindness because they don't want to be taken advantage of. They have been trained to recognize transactional opportunities and to avoid them. And so those operating under this model of relationships of convenience end up harming everybody because those on the other side learn to isolate to protect what resources they have. And that gets me thinking. When we understand that the convenience relationship is rooted in colonial, capitalistic, and patriarchal logic, it's easy to realize that challenging it is not just about being a better friend. We have to choose an entirely different ethical philosophy, an entirely different way of thinking about moving through the world and the wakes that we cause with our motion. The same impulse that drives the friend who ghosts when you need help is the one that fuels systemic injustice. Both prioritize short-term individual gain over long-term communal well-being. That micro behavior is a reflection of the macro system. And we see this extractive mindset constantly glorified in popular culture. The romanticization of the ruthless executive or the charismatic manipulator, just look at our government, or in literature, the Gatsby archetype, who uses his connections purely as instruments to achieve a selfish goal. When media presents betrayal and callousness as the necessary price of success, it normalizes the idea that relationships are a series of calculated bargains, eroding public trust one transaction at a time. It becomes a learned intergenerational script. And to challenge this pattern, we can look to the characters and real-world figures who operate from a place of disciplined, non-extractive love. And a simple, classic blueprint for this counter-ethic is Samwise Gamgee from The Lord of the Rings. Samwise is the absolute antithesis of convenience. His loyalty to Frodo is never transactional. It is a commitment to the process of a relationship and not the reward of a mission. He does the unglamorous, repetitive labor, carrying the load, offering the unasked for kindness, and showing up when the context changes from exhilarating quest to grinding, inconvenient, painful, demoralizing, humiliating struggle. Samwise embodies the relational discipline that the person of convenience lacks. The quiet, steadfast effort that prioritizes the shared journey over personal gain. And another example, this one is currently very fresh in mind because we are binge watching Demon Slayer. But that same ethical torch is carried by a character from a different culture. And if we think about Tanjiro Kamado from the Demon Slayer manga and anime, his core identity is not defined by his extraordinary power, which he has, but by his non-transactional empathy and relentless effort. In a world defined by extraction, demons literally taking lives, power taken through extreme violence, Tanjiro is the counterforce. He shows the discipline of practice, which is symbolically demonstrated by his breathing techniques, and his care, shown in his compassion for both his sister and his enemies. And both of these are shown in equal measure. His devotion is inconvenient. It is uncentered, and it is absolute. He challenges the norm because his energy input is not tied to personal reward or convenience. It is tied to an unconditional commitment to the other. And we can consider a more communal example, like Mirabel Madrigal from the film Encanto. She lives in a familial system that has been warped into an extractive one, where the worth of each person is tied to their utility, which is their magical gift. Mirabel, the one without the gift, challenges the entire patriarchal extractive structure of the family, not by acquiring power, but by providing unconditional, persistent, non-transactional care. Her entire journey is a quiet, inconvenient act of showing up for the person, not the resource. She is the living antithesis of convenience mindset. And I've used that word a lot, inconvenient. And I think we need to do some work around removing the negative connotation with that word, and instead sometimes using the negative connotation with its opposite, convenience. Inconvenient is not bad. It just implies that work is required, that it does not come automatically, that it requires labor and intention and care, and they need to be maintained. It is non-self-centered, and it is aimed at the betterment of the other member of the relationship or of the community at large. And these characters show us ways to fight the extractive pattern through simple, deliberate acts of pattern interruption. The challenge is to stop seeing our relationships as transactions and start seeing them as ecosystems that require tending and care. And here's a few simple real-world practices to challenge this convenience mindset. First, we can stop the thought process. The next time a friend asks for something or reaches out, interrupt the automatic capitalistic thought that asks, "What's in it for me?" Or, "Is this convenient right now?" And instead ask, "Does this person need my consistent care right now? And is this use of my time a worthwhile investment in our shared relationship? Is this person showing vulnerability and trust by reaching out and asking?" Because asking for help is an act of vulnerability, just as much as receiving help can be at times. Another thing we can do is the inconvenient check-in. We can perform a small act of care when it is inconvenient for us. Call a family member or a friend or a loved one or a partner when we're busy. Drive across town to help someone move or garden or clean, even when you're tired. This disciplined, decentered effort builds relational muscle that convenience starves. And this becomes the practice of presence over performance, of building reliability and trust and care. And to that end, a third thing we can do is name the value of care. Explicitly reject the devaluation of care. When a partner or a friend does the unseen, unglamorous emotional work, the maintenance, the consistency, name it and thank them directly for it and reciprocate it, even if in the moment it feels awkward. And by articulating and valuing the effort, we can actively decolonize our relationship models. Because true reciprocity is the, use the cliche, inconvenient truth of lasting connection. It's the practice of mutual, sustained effort that ensures the relationship doesn't simply fade or atrophy. And this brings me to the final segment. This episode's focus has been on the cost of non-reciprocation, the feeling of being used and cast aside. And so today, depression feels less like a crushing weight and more like a lack. And it's the lack of being able to trust anyone. It's the silent, constant presence of a bodyguard inside our heads, of being in the state of having our shields up, of wearing armor. I start every interaction with the assumption that the other person is only there to get something. I want to offer kindness. I want to offer energy and connection. But that bodyguard, that voice inside steps in and asks, what's their angle? Am I about to become a convenient resource, a quick fix, a sounding board for which they won't reciprocate? And when we are surrounded by these extractive relationships, depression becomes the pattern, the habit of anticipating, of expecting the extraction. We start to believe that human connection is fundamentally transactional, and we preemptively retreat to avoid the inevitable pain of being disposable. The world feels like it's full of people who just want to take kindness and care and only show it in return when they stand to gain something. It's isolating, it's exhausting to be constantly on guard. And so our internal work, our quiet little motion, has to start with self-reciprocation. The only way to break the cynicism that this extractive culture creates is to intentionally show ourselves the disciplined, unconditional kindness that we crave from others. It's steady, non-judgmental acceptance of our struggles. It's the courage to show up for our own practices, our own quiet commitments, and not because it's convenient, but because it's necessary for our well-being. It is reparenting the child inside that has built walls, teaching that internal world that our worth is inherent. It is real. It is not something to be taken for granted. And I get it, this is not a grand resolution. There is no quick fix. It's a quiet, simple, personal challenge to the pattern. Because when we stop needing others to validate our worth, we can risk genuine connection again. And we can start to let those shields go down. We can build the internal trust that allows us to risk offering kindness, even if we know that we might be met with the convenience that others desire. And I understand, and I want you to hear that this is my experience, and I cannot assume others or speak for others. This is hard, lonely work sometimes. Thank you for being here. We're in this together. Your experience is real, and you deserve to be heard. Please find someone to speak to share with, whether that be a friend, a loved one, or even a professional. You're not alone. We've seen that this pattern of extraction, The pattern of the convenient relationship is just the interpersonal manifestation of a much larger, culturally glorified model of extraction, rooted in the logic of colonialism and capitalism, and perpetuated by the devaluation of care, and then sold to us as a product, as consumables, as heroes. But the atrophy of convenience is preventable, whether it's in our closest relationships or in our internal worlds. The work is in building that relational discipline of valuing yourself first, so that you can then take the risk of connecting with others. And even when those connections fail, because sometimes they will, we are strong enough to stand and try again. And reciprocity is not an obligation. It's a deliberate rhythm that keeps our movement, our progress, our growth going. It's the choice to show up for the mundane, the difficult, the unglamorous maintenance work of a relationship. It's the choice to be the Samwise, the Tanjiro, or the Mirabel, the quiet, disciplined partner who prioritized shared well-being over personal extraction and immediate satisfaction. As you continue with whatever your activity is today, whatever motion you may be taking, I hope you'll commit yourself to that rhythm, where you can offer energy that is inconvenient for you, but vital for someone you love, where you can choose to be the person who tends rather than the person who takes. Thank you for spending this time and energy with me. I'm grateful for all of you who chooses quiet reflection. If you have comments, questions, or suggestions for future episodes, you can reach me on social media or send an email to finlos@finloslives.com. Please subscribe to the podcast on your preferred podcast platform so that you can be notified of any new episodes that get uploaded. Keep engaging with the challenge. I'll be here when you get back. And I look forward to that next conversation.